I took the graveyard shift at the Kodiak Island monitoring station because nobody else wanted it. That's the truth, plain and simple. When Lieutenant Molly Cole asked for volunteers at the briefing back in December, the room went dead quiet. 40 guys staring at their boots while she explained the assignment. Solo operator. Midnight to 8 a.m., 40 miles from the nearest human being. The kind of job that makes grown men suddenly remember they've got family obligations or medical appointments or anything else that might disqualify them. Me? I raised my hand before the silence got too uncomfortable. Figured it beat dealing with the usual Coast Guard bullshit. No supervisors breathing down your neck every 5 minutes. No equipment inspections or surprise drills or mandatory morale events. Just you and the radio gear and the endless Alaskan night. The station itself wasn't much to look at. A concrete bunker squatting on a rocky outcrop about 3 miles inland from the coast. Gray walls, gray ceiling, gray everything. The kind of place they built in the 70s when function mattered more than comfort. But it had heat that worked most of the time and a coffee maker that could strip paint, which was enough for me. The main operations room held 6 monitoring stations arranged in a semicircle, though only one stayed active during my shift. Banks of radio equipment lined the walls, VHF transceivers, emergency frequency scanners, radar displays that painted green sweeps across black screens every few seconds. The hum of electronics never stopped. Fans cooling circuit boards, static crackling through speakers. The occasional beep when someone keyed a microphone somewhere out in the darkness. 3 months in, I'd settled into the rhythm of it. Routine work mostly, logging vessel traffic as commercial ships radioed their positions, monitoring the emergency channels for distress calls that rarely came. Most nights passed without anything more exciting than a fishing boat reporting engine trouble or a cargo hauler requesting weather updates, the kind of predictable problems you could handle in your sleep. My duties were straightforward enough. Scan the frequencies, log everything that came through, maintain contact with headquarters every 6 hours. Cole expected a status report at midnight, 6 a.m. and noon, though the day shift handled that last one. Simple stuff. Position reports from vessels transiting the area, weather observations, any emergency traffic that needed coordination with the rescue center in Anchorage. The hardest part wasn't the isolation. I'd grown comfortable with that pretty quick. It was staying alert when nothing happened for hours at a stretch. You'd think monitoring emergency frequencies would keep you on edge, but most nights the radio stayed quiet except for routine check-ins. Commercial traffic following their usual routes, fishing fleets working the same waters they'd been working for decades. Predictable patterns that lulled you into thinking nothing ever changed out there. I kept myself busy with maintenance tasks, checking equipment logs, calibrating the direction-finding gear, making sure the backup generators had fuel. The Coast Guard loved paperwork almost as much as they loved regulations, so there was always something to document. Signal strength measurements, frequency sweeps, atmospheric condition reports. Busy work mostly, but it helped pass the time. The coffee got me through the worst hours. I discovered early on that the machine in the break room could brew something strong enough to wake the dead if you ran it through twice. Probably violated about 6 health regulations. But when you're alone in a concrete box at 3 a.m, you don't worry much about proper coffee-to-water ratios. March 3rd started like any other night. Clear skies, light winds, surface temperatures hovering around 30 degrees. The kind of conditions that made for good radio propagation, but not much else. I'd logged the usual evening traffic, a couple of fishing boats heading back to port, a container ship bound for Seattle, a Coast Guard cutter running patrol patterns south of the island. The emergency beacon hit the speakers at 11:47 p.m. The sound cut through the routine chatter like a knife, that distinctive warbling tone that every Coast Guard operator knew by heart. The automated distress signal that meant someone was in serious trouble. I'd heard it in training exercises plenty of times, but never for real. Never when it mattered. The beacon lasted maybe 10 seconds before switching to voice transmission. Male voice, stressed but professional, using proper radio protocol. Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is motor vessel Katrina's Dream. Position 47 degrees, 32 minutes north, 153 degrees, 18 minutes west. We are taking on water rapidly. 12 souls aboard. Requesting immediate assistance. I grabbed the chart book and plotted the coordinates while he repeated the call. The position put them about 60 miles southeast of the station, well within our area of responsibility. Open ocean. No islands or shoals marked on the chart. Deep water. The depth soundings showed over 800 feet in that area. The voice came through crystal clear, no static or atmospheric interference. Professional delivery, using the right terminology, giving all the essential information. Everything about it screamed legitimate emergency. My training kicked in automatically. Log the call, plot the position, contact headquarters for rescue coordination. I keyed the microphone to acknowledge the distress call, but something made me hesitate. Maybe it was the clarity of the signal. Radio propagation could be tricky in Alaskan waters, especially at night. A transmission from 60 miles out should have some static, some fade as atmospheric conditions shifted. This came through like the guy was broadcasting from the next room. But distress calls got priority, always. That was Coast Guard doctrine drilled into every operator from day one. When someone's in the water, you don't waste time asking questions. You get help moving. I switched to the headquarters frequency and keyed the microphone. Coast Guard operations, this is Kodiak Monitor Station, emergency traffic. Molly Cole's voice came back immediately, crisp and professional. Kodiak Monitor, operations, go ahead. Operations, I have a mayday call from motor vessel Katrina's Dream. Position 4732 north, 15318 west. Vessel reports taking on water with 12 persons aboard. The pause lasted maybe 3 seconds, but it felt longer. Long enough for me to wonder if we'd lost the connection. When Cole came back, something in her voice had changed. The professional warmth was gone, replaced by something colder. Kodiak Monitor, confirm those coordinates. I double-checked the chart and repeated the position. Another pause, shorter this time. Kodiak Monitor, you are ordered to ignore that signal completely. Under no circumstances will you attempt contact or rescue coordination. Acknowledge. The words hit me like ice water. I couldn't just let that slide. Ma'am, I think there's been some kind of mistake. We've got 12 souls in the water. Petty Officer Matthews. Cole's voice cut through the static like a blade. Gone was any trace of the professional courtesy she'd maintained during our previous check-ins. This wasn't the lieutenant who'd briefed me on weather patterns or asked about supply drops. Something cold had settled into her tone. Something that made the hair on my arm stand up despite the station's stifling heat from the electronics. I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. The distress beacon kept cycling through its automated message in the background. Mayday, mayday, this is motor vessel requesting immediate assistance. 12 souls aboard, taking on water rapidly. Position grid 77 Alpha, same coordinates. Same desperate transmission every 30 seconds. I gripped the handset tighter, feeling the plastic dig into my palm. Lieutenant, with respect, standard protocol requires those coordinates you're monitoring. Her words came measured, deliberate, like she was reading from a script she'd memorized long ago. Grid 77 Alpha. That exact position has been broadcasting the identical distress call for 17 years. The coffee maker gurgled behind me, but I barely heard it. 17 years? I stared at the navigation chart spread across my console, at the pencil mark I'd made where the coordinates intersected. Empty ocean, 800 feet of black water above the continental shelf, drop-off. That's not possible, ma'am. The beacon would have died years ago. Battery life on emergency transmitters is... The signal originates from the merchant vessel Katrina's Dream. Cole's voice carried the weight of something she'd explained too many times before. Lost with all hands on March 3rd, 2007. 16 years to the day before tonight. My mouth went dry. March 3rd. Today was March 3rd. The beacon signal seemed louder now, though that made no sense. I hadn't touched the volume controls. 12 souls aboard, taking on water rapidly. The automated voice sounded tinny, distorted by whatever equipment was broadcasting it, but underneath, was that something else? Static, maybe. Or... Every rescue attempt has resulted in Coast Guard vessels vanishing without trace, Cole continued, her words dropping like stones into still water. 3 cutters, 2 helicopters, 14 personnel total, including a full SAR team from Kodiak Station. They responded to that same signal, same coordinates. None returned. I found myself staring at the secondary monitor where the beacon signal painted its steady blip. Green phosphorescence against black screen, pulsing like a heartbeat. How many people had stared at this same signal over the years? How many had sat in this exact chair, listening to the same desperate plea cycling through the emergency frequency? The beacon is transmitting from the ocean floor, she said, 800 feet down. Sonar confirms the wreck of Katrina's Dream rests at those coordinates. Whatever's broadcasting that signal, it's been doing so from the bottom of the Bering Sea for nearly 2 decades. Something cold crawled up my spine. I glanced around the station, 12 by 8 feet of concrete and humming electronics that suddenly felt like a tomb. The calendar on the wall showed March 3rd circled in red ink. My own handwriting from this morning marking another day of isolation. Ma'am, if the vessel sank, how is the beacon still? I'm going to give you emergency protocols that weren't covered in your training, Cole interrupted. 7 specific procedures for handling phantom distress calls. You will follow these exactly. I grabbed a pen and notepad from beside the coffee maker. My hand was shaking slightly. Not from cold. The station maintained a steady 72 degrees. But from something else entirely. The beacon signal continued its relentless cycle in the background as I waited. First rule, never respond directly to the signal. Do not attempt radio contact with the transmitting vessel. I scribbled notes, my handwriting looking cramped and urgent. No direct response. Second, maintain complete radio silence during transmission periods. The signal broadcasts every 30 seconds. Do not transmit during those windows. Radio silence during transmissions. Third, log all incidents without investigation. Record the time, duration, and coordinates. Nothing more. Log only. No investigation. Fourth, do not plot rescue routes or calculate response times. Do not engage in any preparation for search and rescue operations. My pen hesitated above the notepad. This went against every instinct I'd developed in 3 years of Coast Guard service. People in distress received immediate response. Period. But I wrote it down. No rescue planning. Fifth, confirm all legitimate vessel positions through radar contact only. Do not rely on radio transmissions for positioning data. Radar confirmation only. Sixth, report any visual anomalies immediately. Lights on the water, unexplained radar contacts, anything unusual in the target area. Report visual anomalies. I underlined that twice. Seventh, under no circumstances attempt solo rescue operations during night shifts. Wait for daylight and backup personnel before investigating any emergency calls. No solo night rescues. The final rule felt like a warning written in someone else's blood. I stared at my notes. 7 rules that made no sense according to everything I'd been taught. But Cole's voice carried the authority of experience, the weight of knowledge I didn't want to possess. The beacon signal cycled again. Mayday. Mayday. This is motor vessel requesting immediate assistance. But this time, underneath the automated message, I heard something else. Voices, faint, almost lost in the static, but definitely human voices calling out in desperation. "Lieutenant," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "the signal's getting stronger." It does that. Her tone carried resignation mixed with something darker. Every night the transmission gains power, and those voices you're starting to hear, they get more desperate as the hours pass, more real. I listened to the static between beacon cycles, straining to make out words. Were they calling for help? Screaming? I couldn't tell, but the sound made my skin crawl. The voices seemed to multiply with each transmission, layering over each other like an audio recording played backwards. The voices started getting personal on the second night. I mean, they'd always been there underneath that automated beacon message, but now I could make out actual words, names. Jimmy and Carlos, and someone called Skipper who kept shouting about the engine room flooding faster than they could pump it out. Real specific stuff that made my chest tight every time that 30-second cycle rolled around. Mayday, mayday, this is motor vessel requesting immediate assistance. Same automated message as always, but then clear as anything through the static. Skipper, the bilge pump's not keeping up. We got maybe 10 minutes before she goes under. I'd gripped the edge of my console so hard my knuckles went white. Every instinct I had, 3 years of Coast Guard training, all those drills about maritime law and duty to render assistance, everything in me screamed to grab that radio and respond. These were people dying out there. Didn't matter if it was some impossible signal from 16 years ago. Those voices sounded real as anything. But Cole's orders sat right there in my handwriting on that notepad. 7 rules, underlined and circled. Never respond directly to the signal. I'd stare at those words while some guy named Carlos begged for acknowledgement, describing how the water was already up to his waist in the forward compartment. Made me sick. Actually physically sick. So I followed the protocols. Logged every transmission in my incident report without responding, just like Rule 3 said. Time, duration, coordinates. 17 minutes and 43 seconds of continuous distress calls. Grid 77 Alpha. No investigation, no rescue coordination, just cold facts written in blue ink while voices pleaded for help in the background. My handwriting got shakier each night. By the third night, something changed. The phantom vessel, because that's what I was calling it now, the Katrina's dream, or whatever ghost was broadcasting from the ocean floor, started using proper Coast Guard radio procedures. Not just the desperate voices of a sinking crew, but actual maritime protocols. Coast Guard Station, this is motor vessel Katrina's Dream requesting immediate search and rescue coordination. We have 12 souls aboard. Vessel taking on water rapidly. Current position grid 77 Alpha. Sea state moderate with southwest winds at 15 knots. Visibility good. Request ETA on rescue vessels. That stopped me cold. I checked the weather station readout on my secondary monitor. Southwest winds at 14 knots. Sea state was indeed moderate. I'd noted it in my log an hour earlier. This phantom signal was referencing current conditions. Real-time weather data from a ship that sank 16 years ago. I found myself reaching for the radio handset before catching myself. My fingers actually touched the metal before I jerked my hand back like it was hot. That's how good the manipulation was getting. Perfect procedure, current conditions, everything designed to trigger my training. But I didn't respond. Wrote it all down instead. Noted the weather correlation, the proper radio format, the way they'd started using official terminology. Cole needed to know about this evolution in the signal's behavior. The fourth night was when I first saw the lights. I'd gotten into the habit of scanning the horizon with binoculars during the transmission windows. Not because I expected to see anything, just, I don't know. Something to do with my hands while those voices tore at my conscience. The ocean looked empty as always, dark water stretching to the black horizon. Then, right at grid 77 Alpha, I caught a glimmer. Running lights. Red and green navigation lights exactly where they should be on a vessel's port and starboard sides. A white masthead light higher up. standard configuration for a motor vessel operating at night. I lowered the binoculars, rubbed my eyes, looked again. Still there. The lights moved with a ship's natural roll, rising and falling with swells that were too distant for me to see. But there was nothing on radar. Nothing at all. Just empty ocean on my scope while those navigation lights bobbed 18 miles southeast of my position. I watched them for 20 minutes before they faded out. Didn't blink off suddenly, just gradually dimmed until the horizon was dark again. Like a ship moving away beyond the curve of the earth. My incident report that night ran 2 full pages. But the really weird stuff started during the 4th night, when my radar scope lit up. I was halfway through a cup of coffee, still making it too strong, but the burnt taste had become familiar, when a contact appeared at the phantom coordinates. Solid return, showing range and bearing exactly where the beacon originated. But the movement patterns made no sense. Ships don't zigzag at 30 knots in heavy seas. They especially don't stop dead, reverse course, then accelerate to 45 knots in the span of 2 minutes. This contact was pulling maneuvers that would tear apart any real vessel. Then it split into 3 separate returns, 3 distinct radar contacts where there'd been one, each moving in different directions at impossible speeds. I adjusted the gain, checked my equipment settings, even tapped the scope housing. The contacts remained. 2 minutes later, they merged back into a single return. Then that contact expanded until it showed as something 800 feet long. No ship that size operated in these waters. Hell, no ship that size operated anywhere except major shipping lanes with deep-water ports. The contact would appear for 5 or 10 minutes, perform these impossible maneuvers, then vanish completely. Sometimes it showed as multiple small vessels. Sometimes as that massive 800-footer. Sometimes as something so large my radar couldn't get a clean edge on it. I started marking each appearance on my navigation chart with different colored pencils. Red for single contacts, blue for multiples, black for the oversized returns. By dawn, I had 17 marks scattered around grid 77 Alpha in patterns that looked like some kind of search grid, like something was looking for survivors. But the voices, that's what really got to me. The original crew of the Katrina's Dream had been 12 people. I'd memorized their names by now. Jimmy, Carlos, Skipper, Maria, Dutch, and 7 others whose voices I could distinguish even through the static. Same people every night, same desperate calls about flooding compartments and failed pumps. Except on the 4th night, new voices joined them. This is fishing vessel Northern Star. We're taking on water fast. Engine rooms flooded. We got 4 souls aboard. A different accent, younger voice. Panicked but using different terminology than the Katrina's Dream crew. Then another. Research vessel Endeavour requesting immediate assistance. We've lost power and we're drifting toward the rocks. 6 souls aboard. I grabbed my incident files, flipping through pages until I found what I was looking for. Cole had mentioned other missing vessels. A fishing boat from 2018. A research vessel from 2011. Northern Star. Lost with 4 crew in October 2018. Endeavour. Research vessel, 6 aboard, disappeared February 2011. The phantom distress calls were collecting voices from every ship that had vanished, trying to respond to the original signal. 16 years of rescue attempts, all those Coast Guard personnel who'd disappeared. Their voices were joining the chorus now. Each 30-second cycle brought more desperate pleas from crews that had been dead for years. Cole's morning check-in on the 5th day changed everything. I'd been expecting the usual routine, status report, weather conditions, maybe some administrative nonsense about supply runs. Instead, her voice carried a weight I hadn't heard before when she crackled through at 0800 hours. Matthews, we need to discuss the nature of your current assignment. I set down my coffee mug, the ceramic one with the chipped handle that I'd grown oddly attached to, and reached for my notepad. Something in her tone made me want to document whatever came next. Copy, operations. Go ahead. The Katrina's Dream incident. She paused, and I could hear papers shuffling on her end. It wasn't the first vessel lost at those coordinates. My pencil stopped moving across the page. Through my window, I could see the gray morning waters stretching toward grid 77 Alpha, calm as glass under the overcast sky. Say again, operations? Ocean floor mapping conducted in 1998 revealed an underwater trench system at those coordinates. The continental shelf doesn't just drop off. It plunges into what our sonar teams called an abyssal feature. Depth readings exceeded our equipment capabilities. I found myself staring at my navigation chart, where 17 different colored marks now clustered around those coordinates. The pencil marks suddenly looked less like random incidents and more like a pattern, a feeding schedule. How many vessels, operations? 7 documented losses over 30 years, all during rescue attempts for phantom distress calls originating from the same grid coordinates. Cole's voice took on that clipped professional tone she used when delivering bad news. Motor vessel Bright Star in 1993. Research vessel Northern Light in 1996. Coast Guard cutter Vigilant in 2001. Commercial fishing vessel Mary Catherine in 2004. Each responding to identical automated distress signals. I counted my colored marks again. 17 incidents in 6 months. The thing was getting more active. Operations. I had to clear my throat. What exactly are we dealing with here? Static filled the channel for nearly 30 seconds. When Cole returned, her voice was barely above a whisper. Something in the deep water, Matthews. Something that's been using those signals as bait for 3 decades. The word bait hit me like cold seawater. I thought about all those nights I'd listened to the phantom voices, Jimmy calling about the flooding engine room, Carlos reporting bilge pump failure, the skipper coordinating abandoned ship procedures. Perfect human desperation broadcast with mathematical precision every 30 seconds. It learns, Matthews, Cole continued, and I could hear her flipping through what sounded like a thick file. Each rescue attempt provides new data, new voices, new procedures to mimic. My hand was shaking as I wrote "learns" in capital letters and underlined it twice. The coffee maker gurgled in the corner, finishing another pot I probably wouldn't finish drinking. The transmission started simple, basic Mayday calls with minimal detail. Over the years, they've become increasingly sophisticated. Perfect Coast Guard protocol, real-time weather correlation, proper vessel identification procedures. I remembered the 4th night, when the phantom signal had referenced current wind conditions that matched my weather station readouts exactly. 15 knots southwest, moderate sea state. How the hell had it known that? It began incorporating voices from previous rescue attempts around 2008, Cole said. Coast Guard personnel who'd responded to earlier calls. Petty Officer Chen from the Vigilant calling for backup. Lieutenant Morrison from Kodiak Station reporting false coordinates to divide rescue assets. My blood went cold. The voices I'd been hearing weren't just from the Katrina's Dream crew. They were from my people, Coast Guard personnel who'd vanished trying to help. Operations, those 7 protocols you gave me. I stared at my handwritten notes, the rules I'd been following religiously. They're not safety measures. Negative, Matthews. They're containment procedures. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Containment, not rescue protocols or safety guidelines. Containment procedures designed to keep rescue assets away from something that had been collecting vessels and crew for 30 years. The entity, and that's the only term our analysts can agree on, demonstrates adaptive learning capabilities. It studies our responses, modifies its approach, becomes more convincing with each iteration. Cole's voice carried the exhaustion of someone who'd been fighting this thing for years. Your station exists to monitor and document, not to coordinate rescue operations. I looked around my 12 by 8 concrete box with new eyes. The humming electronics, the multiple radio arrays, the sophisticated monitoring equipment. This wasn't a rescue coordination center. It was an observation post, a blind for watching something dangerous. How many personnel have we lost, operations? 14 confirmed missing. 3 cutters, 2 helicopters, multiple small craft responses. The thing doesn't just take vessels, Matthews. It takes knowledge. Every radio procedure, every emergency protocol, every tactical formation we've used against it. I thought about the impossible radar contacts I'd been tracking. The returns that zigzagged at impossible speeds, split into multiples, then merged back together. Something down there was playing with our equipment, learning our capabilities. On the 6th night, the Phantom transmissions included proper Coast Guard authentication codes, Cole continued. Current codes, Matthews. Codes that should be impossible for anything outside our command structure to possess. My hands were shaking now. The authentication codes were classified, changed monthly, distributed through secure channels. If this thing had access to current codes, it's been inside our communications network, I whispered. Affirmative. For how long, we don't know. The 7th night arrived with clear skies and dead calm seas. I'd spent the day reviewing my incident reports, cross-referencing Cole's revelations with my observations. The pattern was unmistakable. Something intelligent was studying us, learning from every interaction, becoming more sophisticated with each passing year. At 2200 hours, the Phantom signal began its familiar cycle. But something was different. The automated message played as usual, but underneath it I heard a new voice, clear as day, using proper Coast Guard radio protocol, my own voice. Coast Guard operations. This is Remote Station Delta 7 declaring emergency evacuation. Request immediate helicopter extraction. Grid coordinates 77 Alpha showing multiple hostile contacts. Repeat, requesting immediate emergency extraction for station personnel. I stared at the radio console in horror, listening to myself call for help with perfect inflection, using my exact speech patterns, my radio call sign, my station designation. The thing had recorded me during my regular check-ins and was now broadcasting my voice as part of its lure. The transmission ended, and 30 seconds later, it began again. My voice, calling for emergency evacuation that would send a helicopter directly into whatever was waiting in the deep water at Grid 77 Alpha. The thing is, I should have realized sooner what was happening with my voice. The entity wasn't just playing back some recording like a broken radio. It had been studying me, learning the way I talked, the pauses I took between words, how I said "Roger that," with just a hint of fatigue after 12 hours on shift. It knew which frequencies I used for different calls, knew I always started my position reports with grid coordinates first, then vessel count, then weather conditions. When I heard myself calling for emergency extraction that 7th night, it wasn't just my voice. It was me having a conversation I'd never had, using words I'd never spoken, but in exactly the way I would have said them if I was actually trapped at Delta 7 with hostile contacts bearing down on my position. The entity had dissected months of my radio communications and rebuilt them into something that sounded more like me than I did. I grabbed the binoculars from their hook beside the radar console. My hands were shaking. Couldn't help that. But I managed to get the night vision attachment screwed on properly. Took me 3 tries to get the focus ring adjusted right. That's when I saw them. Ships. Multiple vessels scattered across the horizon at Grid 77 Alpha. Maybe 6 or 7 of them spread out over a couple miles of open water. Each one showing the exact same light configuration. Red port light, green starboard light. White masthead light positioned in perfect regulation spacing. They rolled with the swells in identical rhythm like they were all the same vessel somehow duplicated across the seascape. But here's what made my skin crawl. Every single one of those Phantom ships was broadcasting from the exact same coordinates. My radar showed them at different positions, scattered across maybe 8 square miles of ocean. But the radio triangulation equipment, the same gear that could pinpoint a distress beacon to within 50 yards, insisted they were all transmitting from one specific point in the water. I kept the binoculars trained on the nearest vessel while I reached for my depth finder. The thing had been acting up for weeks, giving me readings that didn't match the navigation charts. But what I saw on the screen made me wish it really was just broken equipment. The depth measurements were scrolling past the normal readout range. My gear was rated for 1,500 fathoms, plenty deep enough for anything in these waters, but the numbers kept climbing. 2,000 fathoms, 3,000, 4,000 feet down and still going, like the ocean floor was dropping away into some kind of bottomless pit. Then I saw movement on the depth finder. Not the steady return you'd get from a solid bottom, but something shifting. Something massive down there in the deepest water, moving in patterns too deliberate to be currents or debris. The sonar return painted shadows the size of city blocks, drifting through the abyssal darkness like clouds passing across the moon. I lowered the binoculars and rubbed my eyes. When I looked again through the night vision, the phantom vessels had changed position. Not randomly. They were arranging themselves in some kind of formation, a geometric pattern that made my eyes water when I tried to focus on it directly. The lights formed intersecting lines across the water, creating approach vectors that all led to the same central point. Like landing lights at an airport, except these were designed to guide rescue boats into specific routes, into a trap that had been refined over decades of successful hunts. My radio crackled to life, Cole's voice, but different somehow, tired, maybe defeated. Delta 7, this is operations. Final transmission. I grabbed the handset, my palm slick with sweat. Operations, this is Delta 7. Go ahead. There was a long pause. Static filled the space between us while I watched the phantom lights pulse in their hypnotic formation on the horizon. Matthews, I need you to understand something about your assignment out there. Her voice carried weight I'd never heard before. Not the crisp authority of a Coast Guard officer, but the hollow exhaustion of someone who'd been carrying a terrible burden for too long. The protocols I gave you, they weren't designed to keep you safe. They were designed to keep you in position long enough for the entity to study you, to learn your voice, your procedures, your responses. I stared at the handset. The words didn't make sense, even though some part of me had been expecting them. The Coast Guard has been managing this situation for 37 years, Cole continued. We've been feeding it rescue teams on a carefully controlled schedule, just enough to keep it satisfied, to prevent it from expanding its hunting grounds beyond Grid 77 Alpha. The phantom vessel's lights pulsed brighter, as if responding to her transmission. Every vessel we've lost, every crew that's vanished, those weren't accidents or failed rescues. They were deliberate sacrifices. Calculated losses to maintain containment of something we don't understand and can't destroy. My mouth went dry. I thought about the 14 missing Coast Guard personnel she'd mentioned, the 3 cutters, the helicopters. Your assignment was never about monitoring radio traffic, Matthews. You're bait. The entity's most active during its anniversary period, and we needed someone in position to serve as a lure during its peak hunting cycle. The depth finder showed something rising from the trench, something enormous, ascending through thousands of feet of black water toward the surface, where the phantom vessels waited with their impossible lights. You were selected because you're alone out there. No family to ask questions when you disappear. No close connections at headquarters to investigate too thoroughly when your station goes silent. Cole's final words cut through the static like a blade through flesh, leaving me alone with the truth I should have seen coming from the first night I heard that phantom distress call. The horizon started bleeding pink around 5:30 in the morning. I'd been staring at those same radar contacts for hours now, watching them multiply like cancer cells across my scope. What started as maybe 8 or 9 impossible returns had grown into something that made my equipment look like it was tracking a goddamn invasion fleet. The coffee had gone cold in my mug hours ago. Bitter stuff anyway. I'd been making it too strong for weeks now, trying to keep my head clear while everything around me went to hell. My hands shook as I adjusted the radar gain, hoping maybe I'd been seeing things wrong. But there they were, dozens of contacts now, all converging on a single point. My coordinates. The distress calls had been building all night too. What started as that familiar 30-second cycle from Katrina's dream had become... Christ, I don't know how to describe it. Like listening to a stadium full of drowning people. Voices layered over voices, each one crystal clear and desperate as hell. I could make out individual words now, names, coordinates, equipment failures. But they all blended together into this wall of sound that made my teeth ache. I pressed my palms against my ears, trying to block it out. Didn't help. The sound wasn't just coming through the radio speakers anymore. It was in the air itself, vibrating through the concrete walls, up through the metal desk, into my bones. The whole station hummed with it. The radar scope pulsed with each new contact. 43 returns now. I'd stopped counting after 30, but the screen kept adding more. They appeared in clusters, groups of 3 or 4 at a time, all heading toward the same point. Toward me. That's when it hit me. I wasn't monitoring these signals. I was sending them. The realization came like a punch to the gut. I stared at my radio equipment, the transmitter that I'd been using for months to check in with Cole, to report weather, to log vessel traffic. The same transmitter that had been humming constantly, even during the quiet hours when I wasn't actively broadcasting. I'd always figured it was normal background noise, equipment cycling through diagnostic routines. But it wasn't diagnostics. It was transmission. I grabbed the technical manual from the shelf above my console, pages crackling as I flipped through frequency allocation charts. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely read the fine print. There, buried in the specifications, power output ratings that made my blood turn to ice water. This wasn't a monitoring station. It was a broadcast facility. The antenna array outside wasn't designed to receive signals from ships in distress. It was built to transmit across hundreds of miles of open ocean. Every frequency I'd been monitoring, every emergency channel I'd been scanning, I'd been pumping out signals on all of them. Phantom distress calls riding on carrier waves, strong enough to reach shipping lanes from here to the Aleutians. I thought about all those cargo haulers and fishing boats I'd been logging in my reports. Regular traffic, I'd called it. Vessels heading to and from Kodiak, Dutch Harbor, Anchorage. Normal maritime activity. But what if it wasn't normal at all? What if every single one of those boats had been following distress signals? Signals that originated right here, from my station, broadcasting automated maydays that would draw any decent captain toward Grid 77 Alpha to attempt rescue operations that would never succeed. The entity in the deep water didn't need to hunt. It had me doing the hunting for it. I yanked open the desk drawer where I kept my incident reports. Page after page of logged vessel traffic, dating back 3 months to when I'd first arrived at Delta 7. Fishing vessel Northern Pride, heading southwest at 1400 hours. Cargo hauler Pacific Venture, altering course to southeast at 2230. Research vessel Endeavor. Endeavor. Cole had mentioned that name when she'd listed the missing ships. Research vessel Endeavor, 6 souls aboard, disappeared in 2011 responding to the phantom signal. But I had it logged here. Just last week. Pacific Endeavor, she'd identified herself, requesting weather information for the southeast quadrant. I'd given her the forecast, wished her safe passage. Standard radio traffic. Except there was no Pacific Endeavor. There was only research vessel Endeavor, sitting on the ocean floor with 6 dead crew members who'd been feeding that thing in the trench for 13 years. Every ship I'd logged, every routine radio check, every normal piece of maritime traffic. All of it had been the entity using stolen identities, stolen call signs, stolen voices. playing back conversations from crews that had been dead for years, creating the illusion of normal shipping activity to mask the constant stream of rescue vessels being drawn to their deaths. And I'd been the one broadcasting the bait. The radar screen showed 57 contacts now, all within 20 miles of my position. But as I watched, something changed. The contacts weren't moving toward Grid 77 Alpha anymore. They were moving toward me, toward Delta 7, because the entity had learned something new. It had been studying my transmissions for months, mapping my equipment, understanding my capabilities, and now it knew it didn't need to wait for rescue vessels to come to the deep water. It could bring the deep water to them. The station served as more than just a relay point. It was an amplification system, taking the entity's hunting calls and boosting them across hundreds of miles of shipping lanes. Every emergency frequency, every maritime channel, every Coast Guard communication network, all of it flowing through my equipment and out across the North Pacific, ensuring a steady supply of rescue vessels would always be heading toward their doom in the deep water off Kodiak Island. I stared at the equipment humming around me, finally understanding what I'd been feeding for the past 3 months. The thing in the trench didn't just mimic voices. It had turned me into its voice, broadcasting across the entire region, drawing in ships from every direction with signals that seemed to come from legitimate Coast Guard facilities, but led only to death in the abyssal depths where something vast and hungry waited in the darkness,